Hey guys, tonight we're pulling back the curtains, literally on a world where bedsheets mattered almost as much as bloodlines. We're headed deep into the Tudor courts where privacy was a luxury and bedroom access wasn't about intimacy. It was about power. This isn't a story of candlelit romance or fluffy pillows. No, you're about to walk into rooms where every glance, every whispered word, every towel handed to the king could decide your fortune or seal your downfall. And just a heads up, you probably won't survive this. Not because of war or famine, but because you looked at someone the wrong way while they were putting on a silk nightshirt. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and tell me your city and what time it is for you right now. I always like knowing who's out there in the dark with me. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the heart of the Tudor court, Hampton Court Palace, maybe Whitehall, and you feel the chill of the stone floor seep through your slippers. It's early morning. The corridors are still dim, but the king is about to wake, and you somehow have earned the dubious honor of being allowed into his privy chamber. Not the grand council room, not the banqueting hall, the bedroom, his private guarded world. No velvet rope, no tour guide, just the king, his thick feather mattress, and a handful of men so trusted their presence is basically a sign of divine favor. To get this close to the monarch, you don't need a sword. You need a comb or maybe a clean linen shirt. Because here, in the Tudor world, power isn't forged on the battlefield. It's folded neatly at the foot of the king's bed. As the first rays of daylight creep through leaded glass windows, you help prepare the room. The smell is a mix of beeswax, wood smoke, and the faint tang of night sweat lingering on rich fabrics. Couriers whisper as they straighten tapestries and tuck stray cushions. This is the inner sanctum, the privy chamber. And no, privy doesn't just mean toilet, although that is part of it. The word means private, personal, sacred. Here, the king's world is stripped down. His crown is in a locked chest, his armor hangs in another room. But his authority, it pulses like blood in the veins of these few men allowed to see him before he's fully dressed. These aren't just flunkies, they're the gentlemen of the privy chamber, and they've got the king's ear, his trust, and sometimes his undivided attention while he's half naked and yawning. You start to realize something uncomfortable. It's less about the bed, and more about who gets to see him when he's vulnerable. Henry V, in particular, understood the strategic gold mine of his own morning routine. He didn't even dress himself. He let you do it slowly, ritualistically. Every morning was a low-key coronation, shirt, hose, codpiece, doublet, all handed over with the precision of a knight arming for battle. Except the battlefield was policy, marriage negotiations, and deciding who got which slice of dissolved monastery property. It's easy to romanticize these bedrooms as cozy retreats, but honestly, they're political war zones disguised with brigade. If you're in the king's good graces, you might get to help lace up his boots. If not, you're probably watching through a cracked door, praying no one notices you've been quietly replaced by a newer, shinier court favorite with better teeth and closer ties to someone important. And let's not forget, your presence here gives you information. The king's mood, the way he winces when he bends, the sigh he lets out after reading a letter from Spain. You're watching him become king in real time every single day. And that is intel you can trade for favors, land, or even protection when things go sideways. But it's not just about the king. The privy chamber is the eye of the storm where all factions collide. Noblemen want their sons in here. Ambassadors bribe to get access. Wives watch anxiously because if you're this close to the king, you're also dangerously close to seducing him directly or politically. And sometimes, let's be honest, it was directly. You'd think a royal bedroom would be full of warmth and plush bedding, but mostly it's stiff, formal, and kind of cold. You're surrounded by symbolism. The bed is massive, maybe 6 across, draped in crimson or green with embroidered initials above the pillows. It's not just for sleeping. It's a stage. You notice that even the sheets feel more ceremonial than comfortable. You might accidentally step on the wrong rug pattern and offend someone's great-uncle's crest. Every object has meaning. Every moment is watched, even if it's just by one sharp-eyed valley in the corner. We'll remember exactly how long it took you to hand over the king's nightcap. Oh, and the real kicker, you might not even get paid for this. Technically, being in the privy chamber is a job, but it's not about the money. It's about influence. It's the 16th century version of being verified on Instagram, but riskier, because a single misstep could land you in the tower. Here's the quirky bit. Sometimes your whole job might involve doing nothing, literally just sitting by the king's bed while he sleeps. You'd think that would be boring, but the tension is real. What if he wakes up and needs something? What if he mumbles in his sleep about a secret plan to invade France? What if you fall asleep and miss it? Now you're not just a servant, you're a liability. Even scholars today debate how much actual policy was formed in these intimate spaces versus formal councils. Some argue the bedroom was where real influence was brokered. The king, after all, was more candid when half-dressed. Others suggest the bedroom was more symbolic than strategic, and that the real power was in writing and seals, not whispers and morning routines. Either way, you start to see the truth. Being near the royal bed wasn't about comfort or closeness, it was about control. And every yawn, every slipper offered was a move in a game most people didn't even know they were playing. The light has changed now. It's no longer the soft blue-gray of dawn. The fire has been stoked, the air warm and heavy with burning oak, and somewhere behind the drawn bed curtains the king stirs. This is it, the moment they call the king's rising. It's a ritual, a performance, a ceremony that feels almost religious, except instead of robes and incense, it's hose and tunics. You find yourself standing with the others, back straight, breaths held. No one speaks unless spoken to. You're about to see a man wake up, but it's treated like the rebirth of a god. There's a low rustle, a cough, and then a voice, groggy but unmistakably commanding, gives permission to enter. The curtains are drawn aside slowly, not flung open like in a play, but peeled back with careful hands. The king lies there, not glamorous, not especially majestic, more like a large, slightly sweaty man with sleep-crusted eyes and a half-folded nightshirt. But still, he's the king. He blinks, mutters something about how well or poorly he slept, and the ritual begins. One gentleman brings slippers, another sets out a basin and ewe for washing. Yet another offers a fresh linen shirt, which is accepted with a nod as though it's a royal favor, just to let someone help with your sleeves. And you're holding a towel, standing very still, waiting for the exact right moment to offer it without being too early or too slow. Every movement here is watched, every pause judged. One stumble, and you're out, replaced by someone whose uncle married someone who shared a nursemaid with the queen's third cousin. And this towel, it's not just for drying the royal face, it's a symbol. You're touching skin that few ever see. You're allowed within arm's reach of the Tudor body. That's not just intimacy. It's proximity to policy. If the king grumbles about Parliament while patting down his cheeks, and you're there to hear it, you now know more than most of the Privy Council. Maybe you shouldn't know, but now you do. These rising rituals were practiced to a precise rhythm. You learn them like choreography. Slip on the undershirt while the basin is being removed. Comb the beard before the boots arrive. Stand clear when the sword belt is brought in. No talking, just glances, nods, and the occasional grunt of acknowledgement. The king is now half-dressed, still stretching and cracking joints, and already whispers about court business are beginning. A letter slipped into his hand. He reads, he frowns. You watch his fingers tighten around the parchment. Someone's day is about to get very bad, and you just saw the first ripple. That's the thing. This isn't just waking up. This is power slowly assembling itself layer by layer until it stands upright and ready to rule. Every morning, the king is reconstituted like a sacred being. Nighttime vulnerability is stripped away, and in its place, a gilded shell is constructed. Doublet, hose, cloak, chain. The man you helped roll out of bed is now your sovereign again, in full regalia. But for a brief window, you saw something raw, something unguarded. And in a court obsessed with hierarchy, that moment can mean everything. This morning's ceremony, known as the lever, became highly formalized under the Tudor, especially with Henry VIII. Unlike his more aloof father, Henry relished the performance. He liked being at the center, the sun around which lesser stars revolved. But here's the quirky twist. He also genuinely enjoyed the banter. Once awake and halfway through dressing, he might crack a crude joke, tease one of his gentlemen, or ask who won the previous night's game of dice. You laugh when he does carefully, just enough, never louder than him. You laugh not because it's funny, but because laughter is a currency, and today you're trying to save your career. The scholarly debate here is surprisingly heated. Some historians insist the king's rising was merely symbolic, a set piece with no real political function. Others argue it was a crucible of influence where nobles could nudge decisions simply by catching the king in his bathrobe. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. It wasn't the only path to power, but it was certainly a useful shortcut. If you couldn't be a general or a chancellor, being the guy who picked out the king's codpiece was a pretty solid plan B. You start to notice patterns. The king's mood in the morning sets the tone for the entire day. If he wakes cheerful, laws pass, gifts are handed out, ambassadors are welcomed with banquets. If he wakes irritable, heads roll, literally. So being part of this inner circle means you're also the court's emotional barometer. People outside these walls will ask, "Was His Majesty cheerful this morning?" before deciding whether to approach him about their inheritance dispute or request for a noble title. And you, holder of towels and watcher of royal yawns, become a kind of secret oracle. But this access is fickle. One day you're offering a velvet doublet and getting a smile in return. The next day, the king says nothing, doesn't meet your eye, and someone else takes your place. You're not fired yet, but you've been noticed, or worse, unnoticed. In the Tudor court, irrelevance is death by 1,000 yawns. And there's another layer, the politics among the gentlemen themselves. They're not your friends, they're rivals. Smiling in the morning, watching your every move. You might share jokes now, but one word in the wrong ear, one small betrayal, and you're gone. Maybe worse than gone. Maybe questioned, imprisoned, or blackmailed. You hear stories about others who got too close to the king, saw too much, and were encouraged to retire to the countryside permanently. Still, as you help fasten the final belt loop and step back, you feel something strange, a thrill almost. You're part of a centuries-old ceremony, half liturgy, half performance art. The air smells like rose oil and leather, the king's boots gleam, and he, finely upright and adorned, looks every bit the monarch the public expects. But you remember the way he rubbed his eyes just minutes ago. You remember the offhanded sigh about his leg pain. You remember that behind all the pageantry, he's still just a man. And for now, you're the one holding his towel. Now that the king is dressed and walking with slow ceremonial steps toward the presence chamber. The room behind him, his private sanctuary, goes strangely still. The fire crackles with no one paying attention to it. The scent of lavender water and wool hangs in the air. You linger watching the others clear away linens, brush out the rug, and fold garments with ritual precision. But the real drama never quite happens while the king is present. No, the thickest plots, the heaviest silences, they all live in the moments just after he's left the room. You glance toward the bed, still slightly rumpled from where the monarch had lain minutes earlier. It dominates the space like an altar, its frame intricately carved and gilded, draped with curtains heavy enough to block out both light and eavesdroppers. The bedding itself is a fortress. Layers of embroidered covers, sheets of fine Holland linen, and under that a mattress stuffed with feathers so soft it feels like a trap. This isn't a place of rest. This is where whispers stick like candle soot. This is where politics hides in plain sight. See, the Tudor bed was never just for sleeping. It was a political prop, a coded message, and sometimes even a makeshift stage. These beds were built for visibility, positioned with purpose, surrounded by furniture that gave the impression of intimacy, but allowed for plenty of watchful eyes. You might find yourself helping to arrange the pillows before a guest is brought in, not for lounging, but to kneel beside it and whisper something conspiratorial through the gauze of privacy. It's performative secrecy. Everyone knows you're talking in private, but they also know you're doing it here where it matters. The fact is, there's something almost absurdly powerful about being in this room, and dangerous. Once inside the privy chamber, your presence itself becomes a political statement. You're either in favor or about to be devoured by those who are. The bed, surrounded by those thick curtains and ever-watchful servants, becomes the axis of shifting power. A nod from the king while seated on the edge of it might earn you a knighthood. A look of disapproval during his nightly prayers. Well, you'd best start packing. You start to see how access to the royal bedchamber isn't just privilege, it's currency. People trade favors, gamble alliances, and risk their reputations for a moment inside these walls. And the curtains, they're not just fabric. They're shields, secrets, status symbols. They're drawn for reasons that often have nothing to do with sleep. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The thicker the curtain, the murkier the politics. One morning, you watch a lesser noble, a cousin of someone important, ushered into the chamber with excessive ceremony. He's nervous, bowing too deeply, sweating through his doublet. A gift is handed to the king. There's a moment of stiff exchange, then a private word beside the bed. You don't hear the conversation, but you do notice the way the king's expression changes. Later that afternoon, word spreads. The noble's debt is forgiven, and his rival mysteriously loses a court post. Coincidence? Maybe. But in the Tudor world, those little curtain conversations are rarely innocent. There's also a kind of jealousy that simmers here, thick and sour. You see it in the way one gentleman glances sideways when another is invited to assist with the king's nightcap. You hear it in the clipped tones of a chamberlain who used to be first in, last out, and now stands near the doorway like a scolded dog. You realize that access is both a blessing and a curse. Once you've been inside the bedchamber, it's all the more humiliating to be shut out. And yes, sometimes that exclusion is literal. The king could close his curtains at night and signal exactly who was welcome and who wasn't. It wasn't always about sex either. Sometimes it was a silent punishment. You've seen noblemen spend hours waiting outside the chamber doors, faking casual conversation, all while hoping the king might send for them. Spoiler, he usually doesn't. Quirky, detailed time. Royal beds were often checked before the king entered them for intruders, for weapons, for unwanted surprises. So you might find yourself part of a nightly search party, running your hands along the frame, peeking under the mattress, double-checking the sheets, not because anyone really expects to find an assassin in the bed, but because skipping the check would be unthinkable. It's ritual, and ritual here is everything. What fascinates you most, though, is how these rooms lie to you. They pretend to be restful, soft, sacred, but in reality, they're pressure chambers. The curtains don't muffle sound. They concentrated. You once overheard a full-fledged political negotiation taking place in hushed voices just behind the headboard. Titles were being traded like poker chips while a sleepy king nodded from his pillow. Scholars today still argue over how much of state policy was shaped within these velvety chambers. Was the bedchamber simply the reward for those already in favor, or the tool that got them there? Some argue that it was mostly symbolic, a decorative appendage to the real machinery of government. Others point to the astonishing frequency with which privy chamber staff rose rapidly in wealth, title, and power, suggesting that proximity equaled opportunity. The truth, as usual, is likely tangled somewhere in between the sheets. By late morning, when the chamber is cleared and the king is off to council, you notice how carefully everything is reset. The bed smoothed, the curtains fluffed, the basin emptied and polished. No trace of emotion or argument remains. The room is scrubbed of evidence, made sterile again, ready for the next performance. It's eerie, almost like wiping a crime scene clean before the inspectors arrive. But you still carry the echo of the morning's whispers. You still remember who lingered by the bed, whose hand brushed too close to the king's, who looked too eager or not eager enough. You file it away, mentally sorting allies from threats. And then you step out of the chamber, back into the larger palace, eyes adjusting to the brighter corridors, but already longing for the darkness behind those curtains. Because once you've been in the room where the bed is more than a bed, where privacy is a weapon and ritual is a mask, you're never quite the same. You've glimpsed the soft underbelly of power, and if you're not careful, it will swallow you whole. It starts with the sound of boots, soft ones padded for silence, moving across the floor just outside the king's private chamber. You know those footsteps by now. They're not guards, not servants. They belong to the men who sleep closest to the king, sometimes just feet away. They're the gentlemen of the privy chamber, and tonight you're one of them. Not just allowed to enter the royal bedchamber. You sleep inside it. Not in the king's bed, of course, but in a pallet on the floor, tucked behind a folding screen, your breath sinking to the quiet rhythm of royal dreams, if you can sleep at all. Because this isn't about rest, this is about presence, it's about trust. A strange, almost unsettling intimacy that would seem laughable in today's world. Imagine sleeping near the president or a world leader, feet away, dressed alert, pretending to snore while your ears pick up everything. Now, imagine doing it in a room lit only by a dying fire, surrounded by velvet shadows and men who would slit each other's throats for the chance to carry the king's cloak at sunrise. Welcome to your new normal. You lie still, eyes half shut, listening. The king snores softly, his breathing uneven thanks to his lingering leg ulcer, which smells faintly metallic, even under the ointments. Somewhere beyond the curtains, a coal shifts in the hearth. Another gentleman coughs. The silence between these small noises stretches out like parchment, thin, tense, ready to rip at the smallest mistake. You roll onto your side, not for comfort, but to relieve the ache of stillness in your shoulder, and your hand brushes the hilt of your small dagger. Not for fighting, just tradition. Everyone sleeps armed, even if you'll never draw it. By sleeping in the king's chamber, you've passed the ultimate test. Your scene is safe. Not just safe from ambition, but safe from gossip, safe from sudden bursts of conscience. You've been watched, vetted, and chosen, not for your loyalty alone, but for your ability to keep your mouth shut. You know how many women visit the king and when. You know how many times he gets up to relieve himself. You even know what he mumbles when he dreams. And that, right there, is the power. Because no document, no signature, no great proclamation carries as much weight as knowing what the king fears in the quiet hours. You've heard him wake in a cold sweat after dreaming about Anne Boleyn. You've seen him weep silently on the anniversary of Jane Seymour's death. You've watched him reread letters from his daughters, lips moving silently as though conjuring their voices in the stillness. You don't speak of these moments, not ever, but they mark you. Give you an edge over every courtier scrambling outside the chamber door. It's strange, though, because while your proximity gives you power, it also traps you. The gentlemen of the privy chamber are closer to the king than his own council, closer than most of his wives by the end of their marriages. And yet, you have no real freedom. You don't get to leave court. You don't travel unless the king travels. If he stays up late drinking, so do you. If he falls into a foul mood, you have to sue it. Sometimes by laughing at an off-color joke, sometimes by sitting silently and enduring the weight of his silence. There's an ongoing joke among the gentlemen. We're not servants, we're hostages with combs. And it's not far from the truth. The chamber's furniture shifts over time as kings change. Some monarchs prefer heavy carved chests and religious icons everywhere. Others opt for sleek surfaces and imported cushions, but the bed always remains the same in its meaning. Huge, central, elevated, draped, and under it quite literally your bed. Because yes, sometimes you sleep under the king's bed. The design allows for it. A hidden pallet tucked out of view where the most trusted gentleman can lie at the ready like a loyal hound beneath the master's table. The first time it happens, it's humiliating. The second time, you don't even blink. Of course, the setup isn't just for protection. It's for show. There's a deliberate theatricality to it. This royal vulnerability paired with a chosen few who can witness it. To the public, the king is a distant figure in golden armor. But to you, he's a man who snores, who talks in his sleep, who sometimes passes gas with surprising force. These details don't make you less reverent. Oddly, they make you more devoted because you don't serve the myth, you serve the man. Sometimes the quiet of the chamber breaks with drama. A messenger arrives at midnight. The king's sleep is disturbed by a letter from abroad, a word of a rebellion in the north. He sits up, calls for light. You scramble up from your pallet, candle in hand, robe thrown over your tunic, heart racing. Not with fear, but with anticipation. A crisis is a chance to prove your worth. If you're the one who fetches the right person, soothes the king's temper, delivers the next command without error, you've earned more in 5 minutes than some lords earn in 5 years. And yet the politics are never simple. Every man in the privy chamber is both colleague and competitor. You all dress the king, bathe him, wait by his bedside, but you also keep a mental tally of favors granted, smiles received, names whispered during moments of drowsy trust. You overhear each other's private conversations with the king, then pretend not to. You live half your life in silence and the other half in smiling deception. Historians still debate whether this inner circle had too much power. Was it right for unelected men chosen more for charm and discretion than for birth or merit to wield so much influence? Or was this closeness a necessary counterweight to the more public machinery of statecraft? Some argue that the gentleman acted as a stabilizing force, loyal, consistent, emotionally invested in the king's health and moods. Others say they became parasites, whispering flattery into royal ears while undermining everyone outside the bedchamber door. What's undeniable is the sheer amount of statecraft that took place between those bedposts. Wars didn't start in the throne room. They started here in the hush of candlelight, in the muttered suggestions over warm wine, in the moments when a half-dressed king nodded and said, "Do it." Tonight, though, there's no war, just the faint hiss of the fire, the rhythmic snore of monarchy, and the dull ache in your back from the too short pallet. You shift again, careful not to wake anyone. In the dark, you can just make out the shape of the king's bed, its heavy curtains closed, its secret safe for now. And you lie there staring at the ceiling, realizing that sleep is almost impossible in a place where power breathes inches from your face. You never think your job will include assisting the king with his bodily functions. But then again, nothing about Tudor court life prepares you for how close can get. One day you're handing him gloves, the next you're in charge of the chamber pot, and not just any pot, the one reserved for His Majesty's daily deposit. Congratulations, you've officially become the groom of the stool. You pause the first time you hear the title. Groom of the what now? It sounds ridiculous, maybe even demeaning, but the truth is far weirder and more powerful than you'd ever expect. Because yes, you are now in charge of the king's most private and unfiltered moments. You fetch the stool, a cushioned wooden contraption with a discreet hole, and a fine porcelain bowl tucked inside. You heat water for washing, you select the linen cloths, you stand nearby, never staring but never out of earshot, waiting for the signal that it's time to assist. It's absurd, isn't it? The man rules England, and you help him poop. But the closer you get to it, the more you realize. There's nothing absurd about it at all. In this job, proximity equals trust. The groom of the stool isn't a joke. He's a gatekeeper, a confidant, and sometimes a manipulator with more court access than the Lord Chancellor. You hear everything. The king complains. He vents. He muses out loud. He might even ask your opinion while his legs are dangling, and his dignity quite literally is at half-mast. What do you say? Always something careful, always something useful. The groom is never idle and never forgets. You begin to appreciate the subtle power of this ridiculous little office. You're allowed to touch the king when no one else can. You wash him, you wipe him, and because of that you become part of a strange inner circle no one outside can understand. You share in his weakness, his humanity. That changes things. He might not weep openly during war councils, but he'll sigh deeply after a hard night's stew and mutter truths into the air that he'd never admit on the throne. This might explain why. Over time, grooms of the stool end up loaded with titles, land, and influence. The position has humble roots, sure, but in the Tudor court it becomes something rare and dangerous, a role that combines personal care with direct access. Think about it. The person who manages your bowels also manages your mood, and the person who manages your mood eventually shapes your policy. It's not all privilege, though. You're expected to be invisible when necessary. If the king is in a bad way, doubled over with stomach pain or unable to perform, you never mention it. Not to your fellow grooms, not to your family, not even in your diary. The walls of the stool closet are thick, but gossip is thicker. A rumor about royal constipation could ripple out and cause international embarrassment. Seriously, one missed bowel movement, and suddenly there's speculation about the king's health, his virility, even the line of succession. Sometimes you find yourself defending his honor in the strangest ways. No, His Majesty is in excellent health, you assure a whispering courtier. You don't say he just spent 20 minutes on the stool, groaning like a cursed monk, because that, while true, is treason adjacent. You learn quickly that the chamber is a space of code and euphemism. No one says the king is using the toilet. They say he is at his ease or he seeks his quiet. Occasionally, if someone's feeling poetic, he is in retreat. And while he's retreating, you're standing outside the curtain or screen, ready with warm water, a folded towel, and a mind like a steel trap. Because the moment he starts talking, even while doing the most natural act imaginable, you'd better be listening. It could be something trivial, or it could be a whispered change in the will. There's a bizarre pride that comes with this job. You know things no one else does. You have the king's ear because you've already seen every other part of him. And you use it quietly, shrewdly. You pass suggestions, offer gentle encouragements, relay carefully selected comments from others. You become a funnel for information and a filter. Because not everything the king hears should actually reach his brain. You learn to polish the ugly, blunt the sharp, and shape the world he sees, all while holding a wash basin. And of course, you can never let your own disgust show. You must be cheerful, steady-handed, immune to shame. There's a ritual to it now. You prepare the stool. You step back as he sits. You wait. You offer conversation only if prompted. When he's done, you clean everything silently, efficiently. You bow, you withdraw. Outside the chamber, your status rises faster than anyone expects. Nobles seek your favor. Ambassadors linger near your table at meals. Even queens, subtle in their glances, acknowledge your position with faint nods. You're now one of the few who can say without irony, "I know the king better than his own ministers." There's even a quirky side note you pick up one night during an especially awkward dinner. One of the French envoys jokes a little too loudly that the English king is the only monarch whose backside determines foreign policy. Everyone laughs. You don't, because the truth isn't funny. It's strategic. If the king can't sit on horseback, he can't ride to war. If his digestion's off, he cancels councils. If his belly swells with too much claret and beef, Parliament waits. Historians still fight over whether the groom of the stool was a glorified valet or a shadow politician. Some argue the position was entirely ceremonial by the end of the Tudor period. Others point to documented evidence, letters, diary entries, royal edicts that suggest these grooms had shocking levels of influence. After all, if you were the one standing next to the king when he made up his mind about a marriage, a military campaign, or a bishopric, then in a way, you helped decide the fate of nations. Tonight, as you fold the final linen and rinse the porcelain pot, you pause for a moment. The chamber is quiet, the fire low. The king snores faintly. No one else is awake. You look at your reflection in the polished brass basin and think, not for the first time, that you've become something far stranger than you ever imagined. Part nurse, part spy, part confessor, part puppet master, all because you held the towel. There's something different about serving in the queen's chambers. The lighting is softer, the voice is quieter. The floors, you notice, are warmer underfoot, less echo, less clatter. But don't let the calm fool you. This room is every bit as political as the king's bedchamber, maybe even more so. You don't just carry linens here. You carry knowledge, glances, secrets hidden in gestures that outsiders would never notice. You've been stationed here tonight in the Queen's privy chamber, and already you understand that being close to a Tudor queen isn't about gossip or glamour. It's about rules, hundreds of them. Rules of proximity, rules of speech, rules of touch. And of those, the last is the most important. You do not touch the queen, not unless it's required, and even then only under strict supervision. It sounds odd. How can you serve someone you can't touch? But Tudor queens weren't just royal wives. They were symbols of fertility, virtue, and divine order. Their bodies weren't their own. They were the property of the dynasty, which makes you effectively a steward of sacred flesh. Congratulations again. You notice it first with Amblaine. She moves like she's being watched even when she isn't. Her gaze is sharp, alert, always measuring. You're one of the ladies in waiting now. Technically a chamberer, allowed to help with her clothing, her hair, her bedding, but never alone. Always in pairs, sometimes in threes, as if the queen might try to bolt or whisper state secrets if left unwatched. You help her into her nightgown, laced from the back with ribbons stiff from starch and perfume. The fabric is cool in your hands, her skin warmer than you expect. She never thanks you out loud, but her glance lingers just long enough to remind you she's not unaware. Serving a Tudor queen means understanding her cycle, literally. You keep track of her courses, record her appetite, even note changes in her sleep. Why? Because pregnancy is more than a personal matter. It's a political earthquake. Every missed period could mean a future heir, every cramp a national disappointment. You remember the way the whole room went quiet the last time Anne fainted. No one said anything, just paused. A few exchanged looks. You could hear the rustle of her gown as she was helped to a seat, and behind that, something colder. The machinery of dynasty whirring into motion, considering what would happen if she were carrying a son or if she wasn't. Touch, when it happens, is clinical. You help bathe her once a week, though that's more symbolic than sanitary. The water isn't exactly hot, and the soap soft, lye with rose oil is more about fragrance than function. Still, you hold the cloth. You help her balance on the slippery wooden stool. You dry her feet, and all the while, other eyes watch. There are always witnesses, even when she bathes, especially when she bathes. The queen is not supposed to be touched by any man but the king. This rule gets blurred during childbirth and medical emergencies, of course, but in daily life it stands. If the doctor must examine her, a female attendant is always present, and you, not a friend, not a sister, but something in between, become the human buffer between her vulnerability and the world. You realize quickly that affection is rare here. But trust is gold. Earn it, and you'll have more influence than a dozen dukes. There's a strange, almost theatrical intimacy in the queen's chamber. You sit at her feet during embroidery. You brush her hair while she stares into the fire miles away. Sometimes she talks to no one in particular, little bursts of thought, complaints about the ambassador's bad breath, a comment on a dream she had. You learn to listen without reacting. Never agree too quickly. Never correct her, but always remember. These murmured comments can become caught currency by morning. One evening, Anne snaps her fingers and orders a certain lady out of the room. No reason given. The woman hesitates, curtsies, and leaves. You feel the temperature shift. Anne turns to you, her voice low. Don't trust her. She speaks French only when it suits her. That's it. No further explanation, but you know enough to pass it on to the right ears, and soon enough, that lady's position is reconsidered and her brother's trade grant quietly revoked. All because she picked the wrong moment to show off her language skills. You begin to see how access to the queen's body is also access to her mind. Her moods are read like weather patterns. Is she pale? She must be upset. Is she flushed? Could be hope or fever? Did she eat less at supper? Is she in love or in danger? You start to chart her behaviors the way others chart politics because, in many ways, her body is politics, especially when she's expected to produce a male heir. A quirky tradition you witness involves the monthly womb wine. It's a blend of spiced red wine, herbs like rue and mugwort, and a dash of cinnamon. It's meant to stimulate fertility or balance the humors. You're the one who prepares it. You're told to serve it in a specific goblet, always at twilight. Whether it works is anyone's guess, but it makes everyone feel like they're doing something. Sometimes that illusion is all anyone wants. You can't help but notice how different it feels here compared to the king's chamber. There, everything is command and conquest, direct, loud, ceremonial. Here, the energy is subterranean. Power is wielded in whispers, glances, and absences. The queen might be the second most important person in the realm, but she rarely speaks directly. She doesn't need to. Her servants speak for her. Her silences shout. There's debate among modern historians about how much real power Tudor queens held. Were they pawns in the marriage game, or did they rule from behind the veil? Scholars still argue over whether women like Anne Boleyn or Catherine Parr influenced state policy directly, or whether their presence merely softened the edges of male politics. But from where you're standing holding a silver basin while the queen dips her fingers into rosewater, the answer seems clear. Influence doesn't have to be loud, it just has to be close. And you're closer than most. You've seen her in pain, in fury, in joy. You've seen her bleed, cry, laugh, and curse. You've held her hair as she vomited during early pregnancy. You've rubbed oil into her ankles when they swelled from standing too long. You've watched as she took the king's hand with practiced grace, even after he humiliated her in public. That night, as you tuck a lavender sash into her pillow and smooth the coverlet, she looks at you for just a moment. "Do you think it will be a boy?" she asks, quiet as breath. You're not sure whether she wants reassurance or honesty. You give her both. "I think England is ready for one," you say. She closes her eyes. So am I. And in that moment, you feel the weight of an entire kingdom pressing down on one small, tired, extraordinary body. The palace is unusually restless tonight. You can feel it in the way people walk, too fast or too quietly. There's a tension in the air, thick and silent like storm clouds gathering over the Thames. You're back in the king's wing now, moving between chambers with an empty tray and full ears. When you pass two men speaking in French outside the great hall, their voices drop when you approach. One glances at you, then looks away too quickly. That's the thing about court. There's always a conversation happening just out of reach, and sometimes the real power lies in pretending not to notice while catching every word. Tonight, that edge of the curtain behavior is more intense than usual. There are rumors. Something about a letter intercepted, a visit that wasn't logged, and the king, they say, is in a foul mood. Not a bad mood, a foul one, which is worse. The difference is subtle but vital. A bad mood might cost someone a post, a foul one that could end in blood. You step into the privy chamber and find the bed untouched, the curtain still drawn wide open from this morning's rising. Strange. Usually the bedding would have been smooth by now, prepped for nightfall. Lavender sprigs tucked between the sheets. But the king hasn't come back here yet. You spot his boots under a chair, but no sign of his person. Only a few of the gentlemen of the chamber linger, talking in coded phrases, voices low and stilted. Then you hear it. The clink of a goblet, a muted laugh from behind the tapestries, and a woman's voice. Too bold, too close. Your heart stutters. She wasn't supposed to be here. She doesn't belong to the Queen's household. She doesn't belong to any official list. But you've seen her before. Not often, always passing quickly. Head down, face partially veiled, mistress of someone important or perhaps no one at all except the king. You inch closer, pretending to adjust a cushion. Behind the tapestry, shadows move. The woman laughs again, lower now, then silence, the kind that hums. You look away. You've seen nothing, heard nothing. Because knowing too much, especially about that, is the fastest route to the tower if you're lucky. This isn't just some midnight dance. In Tudor courts, the king's bedroom is a battlefield. Every mistress, every unofficial visitor is a political grenade waiting to explode. One whispered secret during pillow talk could undo a treaty. One casual suggestion might shape the future of the Privy Council. You've heard stories of favorites rising overnight just because they dared to tell the king what he wanted to hear while his head was still on the pillow. The next morning, the woman is gone. No one speaks of her. The bedding is freshly changed. The king emerges from the chamber in high spirits asking for music. That's how you know something happened. Henry VIII doesn't ask for lutes and harps unless he's just had something or someone to celebrate. The court shifts on its axis, factions realign, and you quietly changing the water in the basin already see whose fortunes are rising and whose are circling the drain. That afternoon, a well-dressed courtier, Lord P, is abruptly reassigned to duties far from London. No warning, no cause stated. But you remember seeing him in the corridor near the king's chamber last night. Coincidence? Maybe, but you doubt it. The timing is too perfect and the silence around it too sharp. That's how the real betrayals happen here. Not in public, not in council chambers, but in shadows, in whispers shared between the sheets. And it's not always lovers. Sometimes it's friends, sometimes it's servants, sometimes it's a groom standing too close when a drunken confession slips out at 2 a.m. And once it's out, once the words are spoken, there's no pulling them back. You've known men ruined over a single bedroom comment. One was just a footman overheard joking that the king's legs smelled like death. A harmless jest, except it reached the wrong ears and within days he was gone, quietly removed. No trial, just erased. There's something deeply dangerous about intimacy here. It confuses lines, makes people think they're safe. The bed, after all, is supposed to be a place of trust. But in Tudor courts, it's where trust is weaponized. Say the wrong thing in the wrong moment, and you won't even see the blow coming. The bed might cradle you one night and become your coffin the next. Scholars still argue about how much influence the king's lovers truly held. Were they just ornaments or actual architects of policy? Some point to Jane Seymour, whose soft voice and compliant manner supposedly helped patch relations with Princess Mary. Others note that Anne Boleyn, in the flush of her favor, shaped religious reform and foreign alliances. But then again, if influence could be measured in proximity, why did so many favorites fall so fast? The answer, you suspect, lies in the nature of the game. Bedroom access is power, but it's power borrowed, not earned. It exists only as long as desire does, and desire is a fickle, violent, easily bored thing. Still, some wield it well. You remember one woman, Margaret, a lady of the court who never officially entered the king's bed, but managed through well-placed smiles and perfectly timed comments to make herself indispensable. She never touched the king, not once, but her words lingered in his ears long after others were dismissed. She was promoted, married off advantageously, and eventually vanished into a comfortable life in the countryside, untouched by scandal. She played the game and survived. A rare trick. Tonight, as you extinguish the final candle in the privy chamber and check the lock on the inner door, you wonder who's listening now, who's waiting just outside, hoping to be summoned, hoping their presence behind the curtain will mean something come morning. You smooth the sheets, adjust the pillow. The king will return soon, possibly alone, possibly not. You step back, hands clasped, eyes down. In this room, the difference between lover, spy, and traitor is measured in whispers. The bed is more than ready tonight. You've pulled the heavy covers tight, tucking the corners with a precision that borders on devotional. The sheets are starched to near stiffness. Not that the king will notice, not directly, but he'll feel it. The subtle resistance of the linen, the faint scent of rosemary and soap, the small signs that things are exactly as they should be. The ceremony of the royal bedchamber doesn't begin with anyone sleeping. It begins with a full-scale production, and you somehow have a front-row seat and a walk-on role in a ritual where sleep is practically an afterthought. First, the processional. The king doesn't just wander off to bed when he's tired. There's a system, a slow transition from public to private, marked by a change in his clothing, his company, and even the lighting. You notice how the torches along the corridor are lowered gradually as he makes his way from the presence chamber toward his apartments. The flames dimmed to cast long shadows instead of harsh light. You and the other attendants move with him like an echo, silent and fluid. Everything is done quietly now. There's no need for speeches or pageantry. Everyone understands the sanctity of this hour. Inside the outer chamber, nobles cluster politely, lingering in hopes of a casual word or a meaningful glance. The closer you get to the inner sanctum, the fewer people remain. This is the great filtering mechanism of the Tudor court. The deeper you go, the fewer the witnesses, the greater the power, until finally the king passes into the privy chamber, and only a handful of trusted men remain. You are among them tonight. You've earned the right not just to serve, but to see. There's a specific order to everything. First, the king removes his outer garments, not all at once. This isn't a costume change, it's a ceremony. One gentleman unclasps the mantle, another folds it perfectly and places it on a chair with carved lion heads. Then the sword belt is removed, passed carefully to the master of the robes. The king is slowly unwrapped, peeled down to his bare dignity. Even his shirt, wrinkled from the day's wear, is taken and replaced with a fresh nightshirt laid out ahead of time, warmed slightly by the fire. And through all of this, the bed waits. You glance at it now and again, half out of reverence, half out of obligation. Its placement in the room is deliberate, centered, slightly raised on a low platform with 4 thick posts rising like columns and supporting a carved canopy overhead. The curtains tonight are drawn open, tied back with golden cords. The pillows have been fluffed. The mattress, a mix of straw and feathers, has been turned. Even the bolster has been plumped and rotated to ensure the king's head rests on the cool side. Yes, even kings prefer that. You remember something odd about this part of the ritual. The king rarely climbs into bed alone. Not that he's escorted like a child, but the presence of others, servants, attendants, sometimes even nobles, is normal. They stay until he settles in. They wait until he gives the command. Only then do they file out, backs bowed, leaving him in the velvet silence of royal solitude. You wonder if it ever feels truly private. Tonight he lingers beside the bed, one hand resting on the bedpost, thumb tapping idly. He's distracted, thinking perhaps about a petition that crossed his desk earlier, or an ambassador's tone during supper. Whatever it is, he hasn't let it go. You stand perfectly still, holding the candle just high enough to keep the shadows off his face. He doesn't speak, and you don't prompt. But you're certain of one thing. Tomorrow's mood will be shaped by this very moment, how he sleeps, how he wakes, what dreams enter his chamber tonight. He finally turns, settles onto the bed, and eases himself under the covers with a practiced grace. You step forward with the final part of the ceremony, the bed curtain closure. One by one, you release the cords, letting the heavy fabric fall into place. Not all at once, never that. You move clockwise, drawing the curtain slowly, carefully. The sound it makes, thick, whispery, like distant thunder, is familiar now, comforting even. You're closing off the outside world, sealing the king in his cocoon. The scholars call it curtaining the sovereign, a moment that marks the transition from ruler to resting man. But even in this moment, the symbolism is layered. To close the curtain is to protect him, to obscure him, to shield him from both threat and expectation. It's also a message. He is no longer available, not to subjects break, not to wives, not to spies, not until morning, except, of course, for you and the other few permitted to remain in the chamber. You settle onto your small cot, shoes off, cloak draped over your shoulders. The fire is low now, the embers glowing like a heartbeat across the room.